Since I'd come out of the closet as a teen, there was only one thing that I had truly ever wanted: to fall in love and live happily ever after. I'm sure there's a smartass out there somewhere saying, that's two things. My secret's out. I'm greedy. Besides, what's one without the other? That would be like a sandwich without the tangy zip of Miracle Whip. The fact remains, I was totally ready to meet the love of my life, settle down, and spend forever in wedded bliss. I believed with all of my heart that love was just waiting around the corner. A little over a decade had come and gone, and I still hadn't found the one. It was starting to feel like a silly fantasy, especially after more than 10 years, but I continued to believe he was out there somewhere. One would think after that length of time, I'd become bitter or cynical about love. Alas, no. True to my Piscean fate, I still walked around blinded by the prospect of true love. I loved to sit at outdoor cafes and restaurants and watch as men walked by. In the 15 to 20 seconds each was in my sight, I'd imagine who he was and what our life would be like together. I pictured it in little vignettes in my head. As each tall, dark, and mandsome passed by, I imagined maybe he was a furniture designer from Vermont. We'd live in some rustic lakeside home with 2 yellow Labradors. I'd make pitchers of fresh lemonade and take a glass to him out in his workshop. He'd be all shirtless and sweaty and grateful for the refreshment. Then that furniture designer would vanish from my sight, and I'd latch on to the next guy. He was, perhaps, a tough district attorney who spent all day putting rapists and gay bashers in prison. After a rough day fighting crime, he'd come home to our artfully decorated penthouse, where we'd throw fabulous parties attended by famous people. He'd spend the entire evening next to me, so devoted. My best friend, Gabrielle, Gabby, liked to refer to me as sick, tagging me as one of those disgustingly hopeless romantics she was always going on about. I preferred the line Kathleen Turner used in Romancing the Stone. Hopeful romantic. That's me, Julian Hallowell, rapidly approaching 30 years of age and still waiting for the existential crisis to kick in, causing the midlife homo crisis, which would in turn light a fire under my ass to discover what it is I was meant to do with my life. At 5 feet 9 inches and 170 pounds, I wasn't going to win any prize fights. Built a little more like a thatch hut than a brick wall, I knew I was perhaps on the scrawny side. Look, I can't help it. I'm constitutionally incapable of sticking to any kind of workout regimen. I'm not weak-willed, just complacent. I could have been one of those big beef factory type guys if I wanted to, but the truth is, I never seemed to have any trouble getting dates, so I didn't see the point in killing myself. I did what I needed to do to keep myself thin, and left the muscles to the guys who knew how to use them. I decided to take a sabbatical from dating when I met Danny, my roommate, a little over a year ago. At the time, I'd convinced myself that Danny was the one. But eventually, I stopped kidding myself and swallowed the hard truth. In actuality, he was what I not so affectionately referred to as a walking hard-on, always on the prowl for some boy band wannabe to bed down for the night, what he liked to call chicken. Why older gay men refer to younger gay men as chicken, I do not know. Do they see them as food? Do they think they're afraid? Personally, I don't see the appeal. If I wanted to train something, I'd go buy a puppy. I asked Danny once what a 30-year-old talks about with a 20-year-old. He said, Julie. He liked to call me Julie, for reasons unknown to me. We don't do much talking. I, of course, found this comment particularly offensive. Danny Wallace was, unfortunately for me, just plain fucking hot, at least in my opinion. He kept his light brown hair buzzed very short, military style, and he had bright green eyes that I swore I could physically feel whenever they landed on me. I figured him to be 3 to 4 inches taller than I was, but his body seemed like one long, thick, tightly wound muscle. Despite his sexy jawline, complete with cleft chin, the hottest thing about Danny was his aura. He just had this ease about him. From garbage men to governors, everyone got on with Danny. I couldn't really blame them. The second I laid eyes on him, I wanted to get on. Whatever the reason, and probably because he wouldn't want anything to do with me, since I was 28 plus and well past the chicken stage, I fell completely in love with him. I launched Operation Danny, trying everything I could think of to make him fall in love with me. I always made sure he had my undivided attention when he was talking, as if he were the only person in the world. I gave him neck and scalp massages, my specialty, when he got home from work. The his and his towels for Christmas. I'd regularly get up before he did in the mornings and make coffee and breakfast for us on the weekends. I joined his gym so we could work out together, but Danny was like a damn Swiss watch, up and out the door at 5:30 in the morning to hit the gym before work. While I did view the gym as something of a necessary evil, there was only one thing I'd consider being up for at 5:30 in the morning, and it didn't involve barbells. Hell, I even went so far, I'm embarrassed to admit, as to eat phallic foods like celery, carrots, and bananas as often as possible. The number of lollipops I'd had in my mouth the last year alone. Let's just say that if I hadn't had an oral fixation before, I definitely developed one since. The upside was I probably could literally suck a golf ball through a garden hose. See? There really is always a silver lining. Of course, none of my schemes, oral or otherwise, worked, and eventually, as often happens when you love someone who doesn't return those feelings, I finally stopped beating the long-dead and rapidly decomposing horse. Instead, I shifted gears, did a 180, and became bitchy to him, a natural instinct to try to force myself out of love with him. I picked out his flaws and inflated them to unheard-of proportions. I avoided him with the same vigor and determination I'd avoid being caught still doing the Macarena or the electric slide. While I was still working on reverse Operation Danny, I hoped that getting back into the dating game would offer a much-needed diversion. I smiled as I pulled on a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and a navy blazer and checked myself out in the mirror. Not too shabby for a skinny kid from St. Louis, I thought, running fingers through my short brown hair. I seemed brown all over. Brown eyes, brown hair, nutty brown, well-tanned skin. I could only shrug. Mom always said to work with what you got. What I got was a nice, round butt. I laughed, licking my finger and placing it on my ass. Sizzle.